Okay, guys, great. Well, hell, listen, everyone, welcome to the Revenue Garage. I've got this distinct pleasure today to be talking to Chad Quinn. Chad is not only a leader in the industry, CEO of ecosystems, but he's a dear friend of mine. I'm really excited to talk to Chad today and talk about value selling, guided coaching, all the things that Chad has been involved with in the last 20 years of his career. But Chad's led this organization, focusing on helping Fortune 500 companies set up value offices, and quantify and track business outcomes and find out what the value is at the end of the day. Chad's passion is the impact the lives of others. And he's the host of, as I mentioned, a Voice of Value podcast, and he discusses business to business sales, customer success, and most importantly, how to make sure your value's clear. So, Chad, welcome to the Revenue Garage. It's great to see you.
It's good to be with you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a funny story. I've known Chad for over 30 years. And even when I knew Chad a long time ago, he was a leader. And he's the kind of person that people want to follow. He's got an amazing heart. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And, he's just one of those people you want to follow. And, when we were both getting into our careers, I was getting into technology and Chad was in consulting, I believe. And I was on a pursuit at FedEx, actually. And Chad reached out to me and said, "Hey, and I'm trying to test this value-based software." It was probably in a spreadsheet at the time, Chad, but it was really all about quantifying the value of this pursuit. So I brought Chad in, and we worked on ROI, we worked on value. Chad was in the corner of the room down in Memphis, plugging away on his laptop, trying to figure out what the value was. And I really, I was in awe of what Chad did, right? And just making sure that he had, every algorithm, every chart, everything that was going to, come out that ultimately the value was going to persevere. And so at that point, I knew Chad, I didn't know he was going to start this company. And then I looked back, 30 years later, and he's got this amazing company, ecosystems. And if you look at Chad's advisory forum, it's a who's who of American business. I mean, incredible companies that Chad is working with. I mean, he has created an amazing company, but it's a simple concept, right? When you create value, you create a need. And so Chad has kind of lived off that motto his entire career, and he's created this amazing company. So Chad, how important to you? And I know it's obviously extremely important, but especially in these times, is value and making sure that we quantify the value of our relationships, of our pursuits from a business perspective. How important is it?
Yeah, well, first, Neil, thank you so much. It's great to be with you. Love this podcast and the work that you do. I do remember our time together at FedEx. I think it was cave drawings. That's how archaic our stuff was back then. So it's gone. It's evolved over time. But you, to your credit, have always been passionate and a pioneer in this concept of customer value. So uh, a real pleasure to be with you today. I think probably to kind of frame it for this audience and to think about value selling, interestingly enough, maybe let's start with the buyer. If you look at some of the recent Gartner research that's out there, they have this really provocative set of research that shows that 50% of IT buyers, those folks that we're trying to covet and spend time with and win and work with ongoing, 50% of the IT buyers say that they are not meeting expectation or failing around their IT project. So that's a pretty stunning statistic when you think about it. That, just to put that into context of our own personal lives, could you imagine, Neil, you and I on a plane and, and the pilot says before we take off, hey, I got a 50% shot at landing this thing, right? Or a surgeon right before you get the anesthesia saying, you know what, there's a coin toss on whether this procedure works. We wouldn't allow that in most aspects of our life, that success rate. Yet in IT, it's been able to persist, but that's put a lot of stress in the system where now as sellers, our buyer is acutely interested, not in the product and the capabilities, but how can you get me to value?
Mm,
What are your capabilities and how can you accelerate my value? So it puts this whole concept of value selling front and center because that's the real risk for them. Their pain point is how to get to that outcome. What's the value? And am I going to be part of the 50% of those IT projects that are successful? Or am I part of the 50% that are not successful?
mhm,
And I have career implications to that. So I think value selling is front and center more so than ever. And probably given the pandemic, you can think about just how much financial scrutiny people are going through. I was talking to a CFO the other day and he said he literally is drawing a line on a board and saying, and looking at every vendor. So in our sales community, think you're part of this board, conceptually. And he's saying to each vendor, are you showing economic impact? And if you are, you're above the line. And if you're not, you're below the line, regardless if you've been with us for years, regardless of the relationships. So showing economic impact, focused on value, particularly in this pandemic, and particularly given that our buyers are so adamant about it, it's a smart strategy for sellers.
mhm,
And probably the final point I would just make to this is it's not just good for our buyers, it's good for us as sellers. When you look at the research, even in our own community, you are kind to offer our advisory group of clients that we work with. If you look across our clientele and you see their impacts of a value approach to their customers, on average, a 50 to 70% increase in close rates, a 34.1% increase in cross sell upsell, a 7% increase in renewals. So it's not only good for the buyer, it's good for us because we're going to win more, we're going to win bigger deals, and we're going to keep those deals.
mhm. Yeah, that's amazing. You're right on point, Chad. And it's funny, like we're out there and we're selling, and listen, this age is evolving, right? We're crossing, frankly, another paradigm, right? And we are selling tools now that are AI based, that artificial intelligence and bots and all these little tools that are coming along that are plugging into multiple platforms, whether it be Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, right? And you almost get to the point where there's just too much, right? How many tools can a salesperson use in his efforts to go sell, right? So really what you just said, I think is really important, is how do you get into the mix, right, of these tools to be successful? And as a software vendor, right, that's what we're struggling to do every day. So what I have a tough time with, Chad, is just quantifying it, right? So how do I go in and talk to a CFO and a VP of sales? Because frankly, the VP of sales is going to need some help from a CFO and his financial teams to quantify what the value is. And typically what happens is a sales VP will say, you know what, I get it, I love this technology, but I don't know how to buy it, right? How do we work with those customers to quantify that value?
Yeah, it's such a good point, Neil. And it is, well, I think part of the problem that we all face in sales is there's been a lot of abuse around value selling in the past. And what I mean by that is there's been a lot of kind of widget ROI calculators off of a website. You think about your mortgage calculator, put in a couple inputs, click calculate, or your tax, how much taxes you're going to have to pay. There's these little widgets on the web that provide these kind of very high level ROI statements. And I think over time, what's happened is buyers have gotten skeptical of that. They feel like, gosh, where did those inputs come from? What are you telling me? I wasn't even a part of the process. So I call this the IKEA effect. If you think of IKEA, the furniture store, there is a lot of loyalty because when you assemble something, you go into an IKEA, you buy the end table and you build it. you have a lot of ownership into it. And I think sellers need to go into that value conversation with a VP of sales and recognize that they're not there to give them some calculator 600% ROI. They're there to help co create value with that particular executive. So if she's thinking about sales productivity or increasing win rates, come in with a point of view, but provide a workspace where you can have her challenge assumptions, override the inputs. Because if it's perceived as a black box, somehow it magically got to a 200% ROI for your solution, and you can't show the auditability of how you made some of those assumptions or challenge some of it, it's not going to be credible. So I think that's part of it, is showing up different than sales has showed up in the past, and
Hmm.
show up by saying all transparent, all auditable, and let's co-create the value together, and let them give you a lot of account intelligence along the way. I think sometimes when folks think about a value exercise, they think about it as, oh, let's race to get to the output. Let's see the report. And what I try to share with folks is that there's so much account intelligence through the process. When you're talking with that executive and they say, no, that's not the right value driver, and they give you all the reasons why, or they tell you that your cost assumptions on their FTE count is misguided and they override it. Like, that's an incredible amount of intelligence you're capturing. So, as odd as this sounds, I always teach it's not about the math, it's about the method. Use a collaborative method and a framework to have a value conversation. Don't get fixated on the numbers. Really study and listen empathetically to what they're talking about, their business and the issues and some of the assumptions they're making, because that, in the hands of a good sales professional, is gold. They're going to be able to align to that pain. They're going to be able to drive more value from those discussions going forward. So it's kind of making this a collaborative discussion as opposed to an exercise, and make it more about the method as opposed to the math.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many times we go into a sales pursuit and, we talk about, benefits, benefits, features, features, features. And at the end, we have a slide that says, okay, and this is what your ROI is going to be.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, so working through the process with that team to help them define what the value is, not
Yeah.
you, not the vendor. Right.
Right.
Yep.
Totally, buddy. Yeah. And it's because in their shaping it with you, they'll add more credibility and buy into it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that's what you've built for the last 20 years, is evolving that technology to be able to show that value, not only on the front end, right, but on the back end, right, which to me is extremely important.
Yeah, totally. I think that's where this market's going. So for your audience, I think it's a really prescient point, Neil, that we need to, as sellers, recognize that in this world where things are being rented and not owned, think of just enterprise selling 5, 10 years ago. I could show up, sell a piece of software and leave, and then come back 3 years for the renewal. Today, with a subscription economy, I have to constantly show value ongoing. And so it moves it from kind of a singular event to an ongoing process, and being able to track that value with a customer is really credible, because they need that to be able to show their own leadership. Back to that statistic from Gartner, if 50% of the projects they're undergoing fail, imagine how risk adverse they are, how they want to stay with status quo. Politically, I may not get fired if I just don't do anything. So you, as a provider, as a sales leader, showing up and saying, listen, we'll take a journey together and I'll help you get to those outcomes, and I have a path to get to those outcomes with you. That's a differentiator, much more so than whatever product capability you have.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit to what we call guided selling at Revenue Grid, right? We're leaning into guided selling and the value of guided selling, right? But frankly, there's a lot of companies right there. Well, what is the value of guided selling, right? And to us, it's this path, right? And you've got salespeople on these paths every day, and they've got a guardrail to the right and a guardrail to the left. And when they get off that guardrail, what we're doing is we're sending these signals, right? So essentially we're codifying a digital process to say, okay, salesperson, stay within the guardrails of the sales path, and when you get off, we're gonna notify you of potential mistakes, right? And successes, and to make sure we're going down the right path and that we're ultimately closing the deal in an efficient, proficient way, right? So you're now getting into what you're calling guided coaching. So talk about guided coaching and what you think the value of that is, and then the marketplace of that and why you think this is so important.
Yeah, great. I would start with, let's take a look at just training and all the sales training that is out there in the market today. And I'll share some statistics that I think will help frame this for the audience to think about. So one is the average sales organization spends about $1,500 per rep in training. And that is 20% higher than any other job function in the enterprise. So we're spending a lot to train our teams. But given all of that dollars spent, when you look at kind of an effectiveness rating, how have sellers been able to achieve quota? Maybe we look at that success metric. They have stayed in this band of about 50 to 60% of sales teams achieving their quota for years. So, despite a lot of money in training, the effectiveness rate has not, we haven't moved the needle. And that really causes this challenge we see of what's the difference between training in the abstract and truly coaching, Neil, to your point, this guided digital coaching. And maybe an analogy to help frame this for the audience. If we were on an airplane, when we go back to flying, and you think about being on the tarmac and having the attendant come to the middle of the aisle and give the obligatory security briefing. Now, this is arguably something that is in all of our interest to know the security, the exits for this airplane and such. If you were to look at that process and look around in the cabin as that attendant's giving the security briefing, you might get, and I've done this as kind of an observation, maybe 10% of the people are actually paying attention to that attendant. They're checking their phone, they're talking to some other people, they're working on some item. And that's what we consider to be training in the abstract, because you're on the tarmac, you don't really sense the need for this. Now let's flip the script a little bit. Say we did that security briefing at 30,000 feet with heavy chop and lightning, right? You'd have 90% or 100% of the people looking around for where's the exits. And that's what we kind of consider to be coaching in the moment. When it's relevant, chop, some type of problem, think about that in the sales world of, hey, I need to get in front of this executive. Then that's when you want the coaching. You don't want the coaching in some abstract training classroom. You want it to be done when you need it in terms of doing your job. And so that's this concept of guided digital coaching that we're passionate about. And we feel like it's helping provide the coaching in the moment while somebody's doing their job. And so things like, hey, I don't know how to calculate value, or I don't know how to get in front of this executive, or what's the right way to position an outcome. Doing that right in the workflow of them selling is going to have a higher return rate than doing it in the abstract. And so we're really passionate that we can disrupt this training paradigm by providing just-in-time coaching.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. So I agree. Like we get into these weekly meetings, right? And every sales leader knows exactly what I'm talking about. Is that Monday morning we are pulling up the forecast, we are looking at what's happening, right? Air traffic control, tells me that we're going to get this deal and we're not going to get this deal,
Right,
right?
right.
What a perfect time to say, guys, right? This is what we need to do, right? This is where we want to focus on quantifying the value, or this is where we want to make sure we're expanding our buyer base from an influencer to a decision maker, right? And so maybe in an ad hoc moment, right, we're creating what we call, right, are these signals to say, hey Joe, you need to make sure you get into to the decision maker before you actually commit this deal, right? And how are we going to do that,
Yeah.
right? So in the moment, I totally agree. I mean, this is something that to me is totally evolving. And then by getting AI involved and making sure that the mistakes that we made in the past aren't happening again, right? Extremely important in the path to success.
I love your concept of the signals. I think it's really powerful because, let's go back to the research. Research shows that a attendee of training, let's call it traditional training, not this coaching in the moment, 60 days later, they lose 80% of the training because it's not in context, it's not in the moment. And so it's not that we're saying that the spend is inappropriate in training. What we're saying is how it's being spent needs to be revamped and disrupted. And your concept of signals puts the signal in the context of a seller trying to do their job and win business. That's really powerful because it's in that workflow that they can learn and improve, and it's relevant. It's at 30,000 feet and it's heavy chop. They're not on the tarmac in some classroom, right?
Yeah.
And so that becomes really powerful, this concept. And I think it's going to be a progressive way to guide sellers going forward.
No doubt about it. And which opens up the question, like, what's this market really all about? And what's the value of this marketplace, right? Because what I see is I've been in CRM for 20 years, you know that, Chad, and you've been in and around CRM, and you work with companies like Salesforce, and you get how powerful those guys are. But to me, this is all about actionable CRM, taking everything that CRM has become, right, and making it actionable now. Right. So if I'm in the moment and I'm under duress, like you're saying on this plane, right, what a better time to make sure we make the correction.
Right.
Right. So I think there's a lot of value in this marketplace. It's being defined as we speak, and I think frankly the big boys will probably trying to get into this market because CRM is there's absolute value to it, but I think there's ultimately more value when it becomes really actionable and we're making sure our teams are doing the things that they should be doing. And now we're in this virtual world which to me becomes a little bit more problematic, right? Because we don't have the transparency maybe that we once had of everybody being in an office and saying, hey, Chad, you've made 100 calls this week and you've had 6 meetings, and you have the most revenue of your corporation. I need more Chads. But if I don't have those kind of players, right, and I'm not seeing the kind of transparency I need to see as a leader, right, then those are the things I can put into place to help those the 20% that you mentioned earlier, put them
Hmm.
into action, and having them do the things that the 80% guys are doing,
That's
right?
right.
So
Yeah,
elevating everybody so you get more success. And if I can't spend all my time on the 20 percenters, right? I just can't do it, right? We will have to make sure the 80 percenters are staying at least above 80%. So technology is going to have to help us all, right?
totally. Totally. And you think about where we're going, to cite some research recent, Gartner says that in the next 5 years, so by 2025, 80% of the interactions between a seller and a buyer are going to be digital. We're not going back to this old approach. If anything, all the research is showing buyers like digital better than they liked some of the uh, activities of the past. So, because guess what? It's less costly for them, less travel, suited to their schedules when they want in bite size. So, I think what that says to us as a sales community is we are going to have more of a digital footprint out there between us and our buyers. And having signals, having intelligence, having a way to mine that world is going to be critical to leverage that intelligence to put the seller in the best situation possible to be successful. And as odd as this sounds, Neil, I recently I recently started to learn about TikTok. And now you might say, well, Chad, how can you relate TikTok to enterprise selling? I think we can learn a lot from what's happening with TikTok. And that has 850 million active users. That's an explosion of and an immersive environment. And when you study what they're doing, when you get past the Harry Styles videos and cat videos out there of what it's doing, and you study it, it's basically TikTok at the core of it, it's an algorithm. the core of that product is an entertainment algorithm to guide you based on your preferences, a swipe up or a swipe down. I'm learning and guiding you to the content that matters. I think that's going to be more of our B2B future, where we're being guided through content to get to the right value content for the right sales situation to be successful. And that requires us to get comfortable with digital and be comfortable in some of the AI capabilities. Not that it's going to displace us. I think large part of the narrative sometimes thinks, well, does that disintermediate sales? I disagree.
Yeah.
I think sales will become even, and this may be a contrary view, but I think sales will become over the next 5 years bigger than sales. And what I mean by that is in the past, sales was a job function. I sell and I pitch and I do a proposal and I win. Now it's an experience. You're seeing sales organizations getting involved in marketing around prospecting and lead generation. You see sales organizations in customer success, right? So I think that's the power of this is going to be owning that kind of that buyer experience at a larger level is going to be the sales new role. And that means they're going to have to get very comfortable with digital. They're going to have to be understanding the puts and takes of interactions and orchestrate that experience with the buyer throughout. And that's an exciting future. And it's one I feel that most sellers are going to be able to evolve into and add that new level of value
Mhm.
and not see AI be something that they need to embrace it and leverage it for what it is, and then add their own value on top of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, experience still is a great tool to have, but technology can help you along as well. And I like that. I mean, it's almost like a hybrid model. I mean, you have to be proficient with Zoom and Teams and Gmail and, and it goes on and on and on. And how many times you get on a conference call and you've got a new tool to use in the moment, and you've got
Right.
about 2 minutes to get online on Zoom or Teams and figure out how to share your screens, right? So that's just the noise outside of what value you're trying to pitch to the customer. So yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting.
Super interesting. And frankly, to your leadership roles in the past at Salesforce, I think right now when people think of virtual selling, they unfortunately think about it as Zoom plus Salesforce. And
Yeah.
that's we've got a bigger road. There's a whole different way to interact. There's a whole different way to create engagement. There's
Hmm.
a whole different way that we're going to have to be more tight on our value proposition.
Yep.
Where in the physical world, we could come in and we weren't confined to a little thumbnail of our picture on a Zoom. Now we may have 15 minutes and we've got to be extremely tight on what the value is and why they should continue with us. That's going to be a wonderful new category of sales learning on how they can be highly engaging and digitally proficient in a world in which time is constrained and people are going to want to get immediately to the issues at hand in a virtual selling environment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think honestly, Chad, we're like beyond this big brother kind of phenomenon. And I talked to companies, and I've seen it in the last 9 months. It's, oh yeah, we don't want technology that really shows who my best producer is, both from a revenue perspective and an activity perspective. We don't want to use that technology right now. Now people are clamoring for it, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so it's not so much big brother anymore. I tell my team, it's like everybody's in the same boat, pulling on the same oars, and we're
Yep.
accountable, right? You're accountable, I'm accountable, your team's accountable, my team's accountable, right? So there has to be certain metrics that are laid out to perform success. And if we
Right.
reach these metrics, right, just like you and I did on the football team every day, we
Yep.
had to block and we had to tackle and we had to do the things that helped us be successful.
Yep.
Now we're just doing that in a professional world, right? And so this whole big brother concept, I kind of get upset sometimes. I'll say, oh no, that's too big brother. I'm like, you're going to be left behind potentially, right? So you
Right.
embrace it for what it is, because it's not going away, and it's part of what we're doing.
It is. There's no shade. I tell my team every day, there's no shade. Everything is there, out, open, transparent. And in that, there's a lot, some people are drawn to that environment of transparency. Others, it can be challenging, it can be daunting, and we need to help them get into a place where they can see that as leverage. But in an odd way, I think the technology boom will actually accentuate our own humanity, meaning in the moments that Neil and Chad connect, it will be richer and more meaningful when I show up as Chad and talk to Neil as a human being, and allow the AI to get us to a point where we can have those great conversations, but not be mired in it. Right now, we're mired in a lot of the mechanics, or we're not even recognizing the data. So, we could also say, with all the digital footprint that's out there with our buyer, it's almost borderline disrespectful to show up and not know about them,
Mhm.
from what we can learn from them from LinkedIn, what we can learn from around their initiatives. And so now, that doesn't make me less human by mining that. It makes me really targeted to then have a great conversation with Neil about his passion, right? And about where he's trying to take the organization. So,
Mhm.
in many respects, I think the technology will help get us to a point where we can accentuate the human aspects, and not be mired in some of the old world environments where we spend a lot of time in inefficient ways trying to get to the point where we can get a lot faster with AI.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, information is king, right?
Yeah.
There's there's no limit to it. And in fact, I was talking to Mark Roger a few months back, past VP of sales from HubSpot, and he had a friend at Salesforce, and this guy had a new role at Salesforce, and frankly, he spent his first 6 months buying from this company, understanding how to buy from this company. And then the first day he walked in, he knew everything about the buying process, the customer service process, the follow up, the deliveries, so we have access to all this information of these companies because they've turned everything over to us essentially. You should use it, right? Be smart.
I love that point, Neil.
Yeah.
And I say that so often. In fact, there was within the ecosystems, we do a lot of work with the colleges and universities to help the next generation of sales. And recently, one of the folks, she's a senior at LSU. She used our approach around value selling to win the national competition, the role play
Uh,
competition, which was great.
that's
And
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, that was one.
It's
And
going to be a
she,
race to see who hires her, right?
yeah, exactly right. And so I called her just to because she was very complimentary of ecosystems and the value selling approach. And she asked me at the end of the call, she said, Chad, what would be your advice for me as I enter into this career in sales? And I gave her very much the advice, that last point you made, which is, I said to her, Taylor, as odd as this sounds, I think the thing you should go do is go study how you buy online in a B2C environment, and
Mhm.
look at how they've taken the friction out of that process and how they've made it effortless for you, and try to bring that same experience to your B2B customers. And so, to your point, which I think is really an important one, you want to be a great seller, you want to differentiate yourself, go spend time trying to buy from your own company. Go
Exactly.
see what see how difficult it is, see how many approval steps that are needed, see when the lack of requirements aren't there, how things stall. And if you can go through a buying process and see these, what I call these little stall points, and find ways to accelerate those or streamline them or eliminate them, and then take that into your sales approach, you're going to be powerful. You're going to be differentiated because you're bringing a buyer centric mindset to how this works. Everyone talks about how difficult it is for sales. Think about how difficult it is for buying. If
Mhm.
you've got 50% failure rates, you've got, based on the research, 10 or 11 other stakeholders that you have to get on board to make a decision. And you've got all of the complexity of COVID-19 and not being able to work in an environment directly with your employees to get consensus. How likely are you going to buy? And especially if you make a bad decision, it's not like a B2C environment where if we have a bad meal at a restaurant, we just don't go back to the restaurant. If I have a bad project in an IT environment and it fails, I could lose my job. So I've
Yeah.
got high risk, multiple people that I'm trying to get on board, multiple agendas, politics all over the place. And oh, by the way, we're not working in the same location. That's difficult. And that's your biggest competitor in sales. It's not ABC competitor. Your biggest competitor is status quo bias from your buyer, stalling at a certain point and just saying it's just too tough. I'm not going to do it. So I love your point, and I would agree and encourage the listeners, go try to buy from your own company or go try to buy anywhere and study it. See
Mhm.
what the great experiences are and replicate them. And the ones where you're finding difficulty, empathize. That's probably one of your prospects is going through a similar item right now.
Yeah, no, it's key. Absolutely. So listen, this has been a great conversation, Chad. We greatly appreciate it. So the final question I have for you is just really an understanding of this, and obviously it's important because you're into this space, but guided coaching, guided selling. What do you think this market's all about? How do you think this is going to evolve?
Yeah, I think it's the future. Well, actually, I think it's the present. And I think what if I was a listener to this podcast, I would get really curious on how I can up my game. If I'm a manager, I'm going to want to up my game of how do I do just in the moment coaching? How do I get that as close to the action as possible? Back to a sports metaphor, how do we have an audible ready environment where something happens and we can call an audible and train and coach in that moment? And as a seller, I think in this digital environment, really getting curious on the signals and the verifiers. You're going to have signals that come into play that make it actionable. Back to Neil, your point about an actionable CRM. And I think also you're going to have these verifiers that you get from your customer or your prospect. And sometimes a non verifier is a verifier in itself. So, a case in point, maybe I'm trying to collaborate with a customer on a business case and they're not even logging into the system or even auditing some of the results. And then I'm being asked by my manager, she's saying to me, Chad, are you going to put this into commit on the pipeline or forecast? Well, I've got a verifier of lack of engagement right from the behavior from my customer or lack of interest from my customer. I think people have to start studying the signals and the verifiers out there that are part of the digital footprint that we're going to have with our buyers and make those conditions or guardrails, to your point, of guiding them in the right way to make sure that they're evolving their opportunities or moving out of an opportunity that doesn't have traction. Sometimes we spend too much time in an opportunity with hope and optimism, and honestly, there's not matched energy with the buyer. Well, if we're 2 months left in the quarter, we have time to pivot out of that and go to a true buying opportunity where the signals and the verifiers are stronger.
Great, Chad. Well, Chad, listen, man, thank you so much for your time. Like I said before, you're a great person. You're a leader of people, and I'd love to follow you, for the next 30 years. I'm looking forward to all your success. And it's been great to spend 40 minutes with you and kind of pick your brain on this marketplace. So thank you so
I
much,
will
Chad.
I will always do it for you, Neil. You are a terrific human being and a good friend, and I'm glad to spend time with you today. And for everybody, I wish you an early Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Okay, Chad, take care.
Thanks, buddy.